These are the top 10 quotes that will change your life. Keeping a handful of profound quotes in your head is a great way to stay motivated and inspired, or a great way to remind yourself to stay grounded and present. Quotes can even help you get through tough times, or help you stay focused on what's important. The 10 quotes I'm about to share with you are easy to remember, concise, and will change your life. The final quote on my list has made a profound impact on my way of thinking and doing. And I think everyone needs to hear this quote and commit it to memory. The number 10 quote on this list comes from the author Elizabeth Gilbert and her 2006 memoir, Eat, Pray, Love. In the book, Elizabeth Gilbert divorces her husband and then travels around the world and discovers a lot about herself and the meaning of life. And during a spiritual retreat in India, Elizabeth writes, "You cannot see your reflection in running water." Conversely, we can take that to mean that you can only see your reflection or your inner self in still water. Now, although this quote comes from the book Eat, Pray, Love, it's actually a variation of a Taoist quote or a Zen quote. And what it essentially means to me is that if you're always running around, super busy, super connected, always hanging out with people, always finding yourself in these high energy situations, you never really have time to sit back and reflect on and think on things. There's a reason that you have your best thoughts when you're laying in bed at night or when you're in the shower. It's because there's nothing there to distract you. It's just you alone with your thoughts. This is one of the things that I miss the most actually of being a child, is that when I was growing up, we didn't have cell phones. We didn't have mobile phones. We didn't have Instagram, no social media. I remember going on like road trips with my family, and if you're just sitting in the back seat, you could look out the window and just think. And if I go surfing, it's one of the few times that I can sit in the water and just think. And in a way, it's a sort of meditation. Or if you're exercising, maybe that's the only time you're not really connected to anything, you're not connected to a phone, and you can just think and reflect. And I think in today's world where we're always connected, we're always consuming things, consuming content, and we don't really ever just have a chance to sit back and think and reflect. The more we know, the quieter we become, and the quieter we become, the more we hear. The number 9 quote on my list comes from investor and entrepreneur Naval Ravikant. Naval was the founder and CEO of AngelList, and also an early stage investor in companies like Twitter, Uber, and Postmates. I was listening to a great podcast with Naval in which he describes how he overcomes envy.
But the one that I discovered that spoke to me was the day I realized that all of these people that I was jealous of, I couldn't just cherry pick and choose little aspects of their life. I couldn't say, I want his body, I want her money, I want his personality. You have to be that person. Do you want to actually be that person with all of their reactions, their desires, their family, their happiness level, their outlook on life, their self-image? And if you're not willing to do a wholesale 24/7, 100% swap with who that person is, then there's no point in being jealous.
So basically what he's saying in that clip is that if you're going to be jealous of someone, you have to be willing to swap your entire life for their life. You can't just take the best parts of their life and be jealous of those things. If you want to be jealous, then you have to be ready to give up everything that you know and love and have and trade it with that other person. And then suddenly I think you'll realize that you won't be jealous of very many people. I think this is one of the greatest life lessons I've ever heard, and it's especially true in today's world where we have things like social media. Social media is nothing more than the digital highlights of someone's life. This is the place where people only share the best things that are happening to them. And if you're scrolling through Instagram or Facebook or whatever it may be, you're subconsciously comparing all of the aspects of your life, both good and bad, to that person's digital highlights. And so the next time you feel yourself becoming envious of someone, just remind yourself, would you really want to switch your entire life for them? Give up all of your friends and family, all of the experiences that you have and know and love, all of the skills and things that make you who you are? The number 8 quote that will change your life comes from Will Rogers, and he said, "If you find yourself in a hole, stop digging." So what is a hole? Well, it's basically an untenable situation or a bind or a predicament. If you're repeatedly trying to make a toxic relationship work, you're in a hole. If you find yourself stuck in a project that is draining your time, money, and energy, you're in a hole. And when you're in a hole, the more you dig, the more energy and time you spend on it, the deeper you're sinking. And so stop doing it, stop digging, and climb out and move on. There's humility in admitting defeat. The number 7 quote on the list comes from English historian, writer, and member of parliament, Edward Gibbon. He's most famous for writing The History and Decline of the Roman Empire. And what he discovered while researching and writing this book is this, quote, "The winds and waves are always on the side of the ablest of navigators." And this is a beautiful quote because it can be interpreted in two different ways. So, ablest navigators in this sense means the navigators that are most equipped with the skills, preparation, and experience to help them get through the journey. So the takeaway from that is always try to be as prepared as possible. But there is a second way that this can be interpreted. We all know that it is impossible to change the wind and waves of our life. There are certain forces we just cannot influence. And the people that succeed are the ones that realize this and use those waves and wind to their advantage. Another way to say this is stop paddling upstream. Don't fight the current. Go with the flow. Identify the things in your life that you think are holding you back and see if you can flip them around and use them to your advantage. Before I go on and share the number 6 life-changing quote on my list, I'd just like to say that if you're finding this video at all useful, please click the like button so that the YouTube algorithm will show this video to more people and hopefully it'll help more people. Also, if you'd like to see more videos like this in the future, please click the subscribe button to show your support for this channel. I have a personal goal to hit 50,000 subscribers this month and I'm very, very, very close. And if you click the subscribe button, you'll help me move towards that goal so that I can continue to create videos like this. So the number 6 quote comes from the American poet, author, and civil rights activist, Maya Angelou. And she has a ton of amazing quotes. It was hard to just pick my favorite, but I think the one that really sticks out to me the most and the one that changed my life is the quote, "Every storm runs out of rain." We all have difficult patches in our life where it seems that no matter what happens, things just keep getting worse and worse and worse. When I was in middle school, my dad was diagnosed with colon cancer and he got progressively sicker and sicker year after year. And it got to the point where he couldn't work in his job anymore because he was too sick. And my family fell into some pretty difficult financial situations because we had no source of income essentially. And my dad ended up dying when I was in high school. If that wasn't all bad enough, for my mom and my 2 younger brothers, we ended up losing our house in the 2008 housing collapse in the United States. So it was just the worst of times. Things just got progressively worse, worse, and worse. But, eventually things did turn around. The skies cleared and I went to university and I studied and I made some great friends and, got to experience life. I went traveling. So there was basically a 5-year stretch of my life from middle school to high school that was just not that great, but things did eventually get better. And I think everyone needs to just remember that it's always darkest before the dawn. And this brings us to our number 5 quote. And this is a quote that is often misattributed to Plato. And there are many variations of it. You might have heard it before. But the quote basically goes, "Be kind to everyone you encounter because they are fighting a battle you know nothing about." So as I just mentioned in the previous quote, I had a rough patch in high school when I was losing my dad. And most people probably might not have known that. That's why it's important to just kind of be nice to everyone. And if you encounter someone that's maybe in a bad mood, they're grumpy, they're down, it's probably not just because they're a negative or grumpy person. It's probably because they have some issues they're dealing with in their life. They're fighting a battle that you know nothing about. Before I go into the number 4 quote, I just wanted to ask for you to share your favorite life-changing quote in the comment section below. I read all of the comments and I try to respond to as many as possible. And I love seeing the repeated comments from familiar faces on all of my different videos. So please go ahead and leave your favorite quote in the comment section below. So the number 4 quote comes from one of my favorite books. It's another quote that I highlighted in my Amazon Kindle. And it comes from the book The Beach by Alex Garland. You've probably seen the 2000 film adaptation with Leonardo DiCaprio. But in this book, a young traveler from England comes to Thailand and he discovers the secret community and so on. It's a really great book. But the quote that stood out to me is this: "If I had learned one thing from traveling, it was that the way to get things done was to go ahead and do them. Don't talk about going to Borneo. Book a ticket, get a visa, pack a bag, and it just happens." And the reason this quote changed my life is because it made me realize that if you have these grand ideas, these grand plans for yourself, you're never going to achieve them by just thinking about them. You have to act on them. You have to just go for it. And just like the character in the book, I wanted to travel the world. And when I was just a couple years out of college, I packed my bag, I bought a one-way ticket to Bali, and I traveled around Asia and Australia for 1 year. My mom would always say to me and my brothers when we were growing up, if you don't do it, someone else will. And what she meant was that if you have these ideas, these plans that you think are too difficult to accomplish, well, there's someone out there who is probably going to go for it and they're going to succeed. So why not let it be you? The number 3 quote on the list comes from an anonymous source. And the quote is this: "Bad company corrupts good character." And a similar quote comes from Mark Ambrose. And he says, "Show me your friends and I'll show you your future." Warren Buffett, the world's greatest investor and one of the most successful people in the world, really, he has another quote that's very similar to this, and he says,
You want to associate with people who are the kind of person you'd like to be. You'll move in that direction. I can't overemphasize how important that is, and you're right. The friends you have, they will form you as you go through life, and make some good friends, keep them for the rest of your life, but have them be people that you admire as well as like.
And I remember listening to an interview with Mark Cuban, who is a billionaire tech entrepreneur, the owner of the Dallas Mavericks. But in this podcast, he was describing how when he was younger, he would purposely try to hang out with people that he wanted to become like. So he would hang out with only entrepreneurs and investment bankers and so on, because he realized through a sort of osmosis effect that their success sort of kind of carries down onto you. If you put yourself in these situations and hang out with these sort of people, then their success can become your success. Conversely, if you hang out with people that don't have very high ambitions or are up to no good, you'll slowly be dragged in that same direction. The number 2 quote on the list comes from none other than Winston Churchill. And Winston Churchill, like Maya Angelou, has a ton of incredible quotes, but this is the one that stuck with me and that's changed my life. Quote, "When I look back on all these worries, I remember the story of the old man who said on his deathbed that he had had a lot of trouble in his life, most of which had never happened." And this quote changed my life because it made me realize that things aren't really all that bad, and it's really your viewpoint on them. And the best thing you can do is kind of say la vie sometimes, and what will be, que sera, que sera. Just go with the flow. If something's out of your control and you can't have any impact on it, then just let it happen. In Hamlet, Shakespeare wrote, "There is nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so." So we're down to the number 1 life-changing quote, and this is a quote that had a profound impact on my life. And it really took a lot of stress and anxiety out of my life when I read it. I think it was sometime in the middle of university that I came across this quote. Everything sort of just clicked, and I couldn't agree with this quote anymore, and I think everyone should hear it. And it is a quote that is often attributed to Eleanor Roosevelt, but it probably actually comes from author Olin Miller. And the quote is this: "You'll worry less about what people think about you when you realize how seldom they do." I'll say it again because it's such an important quote. You'll worry less about what people think of you when you realize how seldom they do. And what that essentially means is that you'll be a lot happier when you just come to acknowledge and accept the fact that people aren't thinking about you. And I think this really hits home because I would say most people I know when they were in middle school, high school, when they're growing up, when you're a teenager, even up through university, you kind of have this pressure to fit in, you have a pressure to be cool, you have a pressure to be good at a sport, you have a pressure to get good grades, you basically have this pressure, this outward facing pressure that you think people need to think that you're good enough. But at the end of the day, people really aren't thinking about you. Most people are just self-interested in what they're doing. So there's no need to feel this pressure, and you don't have to have anxiety, and you don't feel like you have to fit in, and you don't feel like you have to be cool. And I wish more people would realize this when they were younger, back in middle school or high school, when I think it's especially burdensome to always have this idea that people are thinking about you and that you have to fit in. So those are the top 10 life-changing quotes. And again, if you have a quote that changed your life, please share it in the comment section below.